I want to tell my story. Thank you for listening. As a small child, I heard voices, but nothing resembling typical schizophrenia. The voices sounded garbled and words were never intelligible. The best sound I can compare it to is what a reel-to-reel tape recorder sounds like when it is played at high speed in forward or reverse. It did not happen frequently, but it was often enough and unsettling enough to me that I told my mother about hearing these sounds. She is a sincere woman of faith, and as such, her conclusion was that if it were troubling me, then it was a negative force, therefore a positive spiritual response would be ideal. She counseled me to tell the voices to leave in the name of Jesus Christ and to pray about the problem. This worked rather well overall, although on some occasions I can recall having to demand several times, mentally not verbally, for the voices to cease. The entire phenomenon eventually disappeared until I was in my 30s. I believe that I was around 5 or 6 years old when I spoke to my mother about the voices. I was 7 or 8 years old when I believe I was taken. More on that in a moment. I was an advanced child and went to kindergarten able to read. I could read the newspaper to my father at age 3. The school wanted to ship me into the first grade, but my parents felt I was better with kids my age. In the 5th grade, one was one of a handful of students taken from class one day and given an IQ test. I had no idea that it was an IQ test at the time, and interestingly my mother has confirmed they were never informed of the testing, nor the results. All of the kids tested were top students, although I can only remember one kid's name today. When I was 7 or 8, so a couple years before the IQ test, I awakened one morning to find myself strangely dressed. I was in my own bed, and my pajamas were on the floor. I was wearing a pair of blue denim cut-off shorts that I had outgrown months before. They were much too tight in the waist, and I barely fit into them. I was wearing a yellow sleeveless undershirt which my mother dressed me in just before a dress shirt went over top. When I wore a t-shirt, it was always something with sleeves and a picture or logo on it. I knew that I had worn my pajamas to bed, so I immediately awakened my mother to the problem. She concluded, without lifting her head from the pillow, that I had been sleepwalking and changed clothes in my sleep. This was possible, I figured, and climbed back into bed as it was around daybreak, but nobody else was up yet in the house. I lay in bed remembering my dream that I had almost forgotten because of the shock at my attire. I dreamt that I got up in the night, got dressed in these clothes, and then floated through the wall of my bedroom on a 45-degree angle out of my house. I remembered, and still do, traveling with a bunch of people who looked like me, other human kids, and we were all on some kind of a hayride, but there were no horses pulling us. I remembered being returned in the same fashion, on a 45-degree angle through my bedroom wall and into my bed. The clothing that I had awakened to find myself wearing had to be taken from 2 separate drawers, both of which were now closed. So, I took off my pajamas, opened 2 separate drawers, retrieved shorts from one and a top from another, then closed both drawers, crawled into bed and had dreams about floating through walls, traveling, and all dressed in that outfit. That part one did not tell anyone about for decades. I thought it was all very weird. I was just a kid. As a 14-year-old, I saw a UFO with another kid who was the same age. We were both staying at the same campground and we were walking near the lake. We both thought we saw something, but we weren't sure what we saw. We were discussing it when I realized that we now on the beach about 50 yards away from where we first saw something. We were now watching a red light that made no noise travel slowly over the lake, at least 500 feet in the air from what I could guess. The light did not blink, just lazily traveled over the water. The other kid ran to his tent for his camera while I stayed and watched the light grow fainter and gradually fade. He returned in time to see the last of it. I got in trouble for staying out later than I was supposed to, and the next day the other kid told me he was out late too. We figured that we had lost track of time, but maybe we lost some time altogether. Fast forward to young adulthood. I got married and began a family. Some of my story involves their experiences as well. There are conclusions about behavior issues and health situations with my children that I believe are also related, but I am not prepared to discuss them as they are not my personal details alone. I will reference one instance related to the behavior issues but not the actual details of the behavior in question. There are 3 major events that took place within a year of one another, and I struggle now to place them in order. Perhaps the lapse is due to the hours I kept, as I had a full-time job and a part-time job at the time. I'll relate them in order from weird to terrifying. First, the weird. I had never experienced sleep paralysis until awakening one morning to discover that I was blind, or so I thought. I could move my eyes but I saw only blackness. I tried to speak to my wife next to me in bed and I was unable. The words formed in my mind but my mouth would not cooperate. I tried to reach for her when I discovered that no part of my body could move. There was nothing I could do, so I lay there trying to convince myself that panicking would not help. It seemed like about 10 minutes. While laying there, I felt a sensation that one or more others were upright at the foot and side of my bed, then moving around the room. I last felt them near the door shortly before I was suddenly able to see, move and speak once again. This was the first and only instance of sleep paralysis that I can recall. Same bedroom, even weirder. Since I worked 2 jobs, sleep had become a precious commodity. When my wife attempted to awaken me one night to look at the strange light outside our bedroom window, I dismissed her several times without even looking. We lived on the 5th floor and she insisted I look because it was literally hanging outside our window and hovering there like it watching her. I was on the far side of the bed, so I had to roll over and then get upright and take 3 steps to the window. No sooner was I on my feet, the light began to travel directly upward so quickly that I only saw it for a couple of seconds. It was like a headlight on a car, but as it traveled up I pressed my face to the glass and I could see an orange glow on the underside as it took off faster than any plane or helicopter possibly could. This was the early 90s, so it was not a drone, at least not a commercially available drone like one can purchase today. When I got out of bed, my wife had been standing by the window. She insists to this day that she did not leave her bed, and that the light watched her through the window for several minutes before she could awaken me. This detail is the only discrepancy in our common memory of this event. I am pretty sure the sighting outside my bedroom window took place before this last event. The sleep paralysis may have taken place before, between or after the others, I really can't be certain. My wife worked on Saturdays, and I stayed home to watch our children in that same 5th floor apartment. One Saturday as I folded laundry, my youngest child aged about 3.5 entered the room. I had the TV on and a program about UFOs and alien abduction was on. As my child walked in, he stopped in front of the television and declared, "That's a bad man," while looking at the screen. The image on the screen was of a painting done by an artist who had been abducted. It was a typical alien gray humanoid creature. My child was staring at this image with recognition. This alarmed and intrigued me at the same time. Who is a bad man? I asked the child. I can't remember if the child repeated the phrase and/or pointed at the TV set because I was so shocked by what followed. The child indicated that the image was the bad man, then stated, "I tell them I don't want to go with them, but they make me go anyway." When my child said "they make me go anyway," their voice sank and I could hear despondence and frustration. I was briefly unable to speak after hearing that, and my child left the room. Several years later, while dealing with some pretty extreme situations with this same child, I related the events of that day to the child's mother. I proposed that since some things happen to us that we don't understand nor can we explain, that maybe something happened to our child. I could explain some behavior which had become difficult to manage for us as parents. The conversation devolved quickly as she experienced some form of cognitive dissonance at the suggestion that her child could have been interfered with by aliens. An interesting comment arose from this same child. One counselor advised us to get the child a pet to teach gentleness and responsibility. We capitulated, and when we placed the pet in our child's arms, he looked up at us with a huge smile and said, "Thank you. I really thought you were both aliens." It was a strange joke for even a 9-year-old, but he looked almost relieved as much as happy. I'm not sure he was joking. This child is now an adult, as are all my children. Their mother and I split up several years ago over unrelated issues. We are friends and have discussed these events in recent years. We have ideas but no answers. One other unique detail emerges, however. An unusual level of interest into my business and personal affairs throughout my entire adult life, including being confronted by an agent of some variety who first tampered with my mail, then attempted to gain access to my home. I have the police reports. My business and personal affairs have been investigated to a level and expense that isn't justified by any nominal amount of back taxes owing. At every turn I have simply demanded justice and fair treatment, reported earnings honestly and voluntarily, always paid anything I owed. When my government interfered unjustly in my finances, I objected on legal grounds and forced them to refund what they accessed. They have threatened me with everything at their disposal and carried out very little. It appears to be an effort to stifle and intimidate me. I show no fear. Perhaps this is why it continues until this day. Your school board is your government. The two weirdest things that happened to me as a child were the clothes-changing event and the IQ test, which I cannot make sense of yet. What become of the data? Why IQ test the top students and not inform their parents? Some people state that those who abduct us and our children do so with our government's knowing at some shadowy level. Perhaps I was not going to work out for whatever either party had in mind for those they seek to manipulate. Perhaps I was too smart and independent for their liking as well. Perhaps it is all connected.